What is going on, everybody? My name is Jack McNeil. Thanks for tuning in. And I am back. It's been a long time, but I am back. And this story has motivated me to get back to recapping news articles and offered my takes in a way that very few stories have, because it's a reminder that you can't separate sports from the larger culture in which they appear in, and you cannot separate sports from politics. I know people want to say, take the politics out of it. I just want to watch the sport. Well, sorry. It's never been that way. It never will. There's politics involved with union negotiations, with media coverage of teams, with the owners that are involved with the teams, that are the players that are involved with the teams. It's all around us all the time. I'm sorry. I know you want to watch the game. And the World Series is going on, and it should be a great series, and we all want the best for baseball. But sometimes you also have to address issues. You also have to talk about them, and you have to hold players accountable, and you got to lift up players in other times, and you got to have clear stances and rules. That's why Major League Baseball has rules to begin with. And so you can't separate it. I'm sorry. You just can't. And this is a reminder, as Ken Rosenthal puts it, I think very well in his article in The Atlantic, that it's time for Major League Baseball to step in and hold the Astros and Brandon Taubman accountable with harsh discipline, in his words, to impose harsh discipline on them for the way they handled the story and for the fact that it happened in the first place. For those of you who are not aware, Brandon Taubman made like a 10-minute video just yesterday going through the sort of order in which these things happen. But again, Roberto Osuna was acquired by the Astros. They bought low on him. There's a discrepancy between how players are treated if they get caught with PEDs, for example, and domestic violence suspensions. One of those suspensions, you can still play in the playoffs. Domestic violence, that's the one, in case you were unsure of the point that I was trying to make there. But the reality is that's already kind of an issue here, and there's a discrepancy that exists with that. And so players have bought low. Teams have bought low on players in the past for this, taking advantage of it. And the Astros did so with Osuna. He's been their closer. So when Brandon Taubman has this outburst at 3 female reporters, and then the immediate response is for them to gaslight all of us, to make us feel crazy for reading that report and saying, the assistant general manager yelling at 3 female reporters, one of whom is wearing a ban for domestic violence, which then we find out later he had issues with that reporter because she had tweeted about domestic violence awareness during the time in which they acquired Osuna in that context. So it doesn't seem like it was some random thing of him trying to defend a player. It's very clear it was sort of a targeted thing at those reporters. And even if it wasn't, it's still deeply disturbing in many ways, and probably qualifies harassment in the clubhouse for those reporters. Even excusing that, which it's not excused, it can't be excused. That is the issue. The Astros do themselves no favor in their responses, and that is what Ken Rosenthal says they need to be held accountable for, because we can all see what just went down. The Astros' immediate response to a story, which, by the way, they didn't make Brandon Taubman available for the whole time. I mean, Stephanie Abstein had the story. I mean, it happened. She had the story. 36 hours later, she reports on it. Why the 36 hours? Well, she gave the team some time. She offered an interview with Brandon Taubman. She explained the situation to a PR staffer. They didn't make Taubman available. She runs a story. Their immediate response is to gaslight all of us and say, this is misleading. They're defending a player. Shame on Sports Illustrated, basically. Well, that was a joke response. I mean, it's a really dumb response because other reporters saw, they confirmed it. Now the Astros look like they're gaslighting. Turns out they were. Within a day, they all flip-flop. A.J. Hinch is probably the only one who gets a decent response on this. The Baseball Writers Association wants a public apology. MLB is investigating. The Astros then flip-flop. They give a non-apology from Brandon Taubman saying, if you were offended, I'm sorry, which is just a classic non-apology, not actually having any self-reflection or admission of wrongdoing. Basically just saying, I made some inappropriate comments. If you're offended, of course, I'm sorry. Putting the onus on you for being offended, not just the very obvious nature of his wrong and offensive and just terrible comments directed at these reporters. And so, again, now it's time for MLB to hold people accountable. They're in a position to do so. It's clear the Astros will not themselves, or at least so far we haven't seen them do so. We've had they've gone 0 for 3, as Ken Rosenthal puts it, in terms of their response, in terms of not making him available for comment, then denying the story, then kind of having a non-apology after flip-flopping. And so while I'm excited for the World Series, while Game 1 was great, while I'm excited for the rest of the series, while I hope and I believe in the future of baseball and a positive future, I also know that baseball has to take care of these issues. They need to address them. It requires reporters being honest. It requires fans being honest. It requires owners being honest. It requires players being honest. And it also requires baseball itself to hold people accountable and maybe look at any discrepancies in the rules that could result in more incidents like this in the future. Not blaming alcohol. That is probably the worst thing. Some people immediately responded saying, I would be surprised if they allow alcohol in the clubhouse now. As if alcohol, an hour after the game is over, is to blame for this guy, Brandon Taubman, yelling at these reporters saying, I'm so effing glad we got Osuna, especially towards one reporter who he'd already had an issue with tweeting about domestic violence. I mean, these are clearly things that he believes, or it appears he believes them, if he's saying them, if he's yelling them. So no, alcohol is not going to be a sufficient blame, response, some sort of modification to the champagne. No. That is not the issue here. You can be perfectly fine while having a good time celebrating a championship. The problem here is the attitude that seems to be shared with some in the Astros ownership, the lack of accountability and self-reflection and honesty on their part coming out of this, and of course some of the rules from Major League Baseball that probably should be looked into. But right off the bat, we have to decide right now, and say we, the Major League Baseball has to decide what's the response to this situation. Ken Rosenthal says harsh discipline for the Astros, and Taubman, I would tend to agree with him, and I'm curious to see what they do next and what are your thoughts on the situation as we go into Game 2. I love baseball, but I want people to be held accountable, and I want baseball to send the right message moving forward about the sport, about the players, about what they believe in as an organization, as an institution. And I think all organizations have to be held accountable for what they're doing. And baseball is not exempt, and you can't separate baseball from the larger culture in which it appears in. And this is a prime example of that. So thank you for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoy the World Series. I also hope we see some accountability from the Astros. Thanks.